What's up, everyone? Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Stephen Gottlieb, Ibogaine Practitioner. Stephen, good to have you on, man. Like we were just talking about, both learning how it is to work from home on a basis due to this new pandemic life we're living in, and how are you adjusting in it?
It is what it is. I prefer this than to be at my office. Maybe it's just because of my office, but I don't mind it. You know, I'm in Denver, and things have really, opened up here. It's almost feels like it's normal again.
Really? So they're not like having outside only seating like for restaurants. They're also doing indoor, outdoor, and you're saying most businesses are open?
Yeah, I think the only thing that's not open is the movie theater, which I haven't checked on, but it could be. Aside from that, yeah, indoor seating. I mean, distanced, but indoor and outdoor. And our count as far as new cases has plummeted.
Right.
Over the past week or two. So.
Yeah, y'all have been on a good path, and see, that's the thing. Like in Dallas, I wish it was like that, how it is in Denver, because it's like 50-50 in some neighborhoods within Dallas. You know, you have some restaurants and bars that are open, and then others that are still keeping it closed since they've been closed. Yeah. You know, so I guess it's really up to the business owner at this point. But hey, we're all navigating these waters. But I agree with you. I do enjoy working from home. I don't mind it. It's just when like my fiance and I are both on calls or something, we have in different areas of the rooms and stuff. But we're figuring it's all good.
Yeah, good, man.
Hey, so I'm really excited to have you on, man. We're going to dive into a very interesting topic, right? And it's all centered around Ibogaine. So for those of you who aren't listening, just to kind of set the stage, this Ibogaine practice, it's a practice, but what we're going to talk about first is iboga, which is basically it's derived from a plant called iboga found in the African rainforest. It's not legal in the U.S. and there are some clinics in Mexico that practice this kind of treatment called Ibogaine, and we have Stephen on, who is a plant practitioner. Who is going to explain, his experience with it and all that it entails. So, Stephen, we're excited to have you on, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be on. And, the word practitioner is like such a strong word in our society. I feel like people think doctor, people think nurse practitioner. It's really just someone who practices with a certain plant and has gained their experience in that department. So I just am putting it out there. I'm not a doctor. But yeah, man, you lead the way. Iboga is a fascinating plant, and there's a lot of different areas we can dive into. So, well, you tell me.
Let's get started with like how, your path to Iboga, right? So, from the research that I've done and the discussions that we've had previously. It's a psychedelic, but it really helps with addictive behavior, right? Especially with those who suffer from addiction from opioids and things like that, right? So why don't you talk about your experience and what led you to discover Iboga?
So it's a great question, and to make a very long story somewhat shorter, I was severely addicted to opioids for a long time in my younger years. And I had done traditional treatment, traditional detox, Suboxone maintenance programs, name it, many times, with some small bouts of success, but no radical change, right? For a good solid 11 years. I was just a tough cookie to crack. You know, everyone's a little bit different. But what led me to Iboga was I've always been fascinated by psychedelic plants, psilocybin, um, especially LSD, DMT. So these are things I had experience with for many years prior, and mostly prior to my bad addiction. In the midst of the addiction, I became disconnected from those things, which are the truth. And obviously, when you're living a life like that, you want to be as far from the truth and the pain as possible. So I became disconnected and scared of psychedelics, even though I had such a profound history of using them. Maybe not for the right reasons all the time, but nonetheless, I wised up eventually. But that's my journey. So I was very interested, to say the least, when I heard and found out about Ibogaine, and what it could do, especially considering it was a psychedelic, but also what it does neurologically for someone who's addicted to opioids, alcohol, or cocaine, in regards to withdrawal, obsession, craving. So I was very fascinated, and I was pointed in the direction of such a small world. It was actually someone who was in my circle of friends growing up, and I never really just knew. Suddenly he owned an Ibogaine clinic, and I was told to call him. You know, and then I went down there and I went down to Mexico, like you said, and they're all over the place. You got Mexico, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Spain. So there's clinics in quite a few countries.
And I would imagine that this plant has some history, right? I mean, this has been used in probably hundreds of thousands of years, right? So do you know much about the history and kind of how it's been used in the past?
Yeah, so it comes from the Bwiti in Gabon, Cameroon, Africa. It's like Central Western Africa, and it was first discovered outside of them by the French who came into Africa to, you know, colonize. They discovered Ibogaine, and they started to essentially mass produce it into different products, mainly stimulants, and these are much lower doses, of course. We're talking stimulants. It's been known to be an aphrodisiac in certain quantities. So they started making different products of it, but originally it was used by the Bwiti as a rite of passage ceremony. This is their holy plant. This is their ayahuasca. This is their, you know, they refer to it, this is their Garden of Eden, and this is their connection to God. So, you know, they use this plant as an initiate, you know, an initiate type ceremony for people, coming of age type of thing. And that's been going on for thousands of years.
So, well, let's talk about the actual psychedelic experience, right? So you've had that experience firsthand. So, walk people through your journey and how, you know, after you go through your journey, let us know how it compares to other psychedelic trips for those who have had them, like a psilocybin trip or LSD, right?
For sure. So, in short, Ibogaine is a tryptamine. You know, much like DMT, but the effects are entirely different. So, you know, everyone will have a different experience depending on so many different factors. The biggest probably being intention, physical readiness, condition of body, of the gut, so on and so forth. But ultimately, an Ibogaine experience, oh man, you know, I would say the first, you dose periodically. So there's a ratio that you use, a formula, you know, milligrams per kilogram of the body weight of the person. So you take a dose, hour later, you take a dose, hour later, you take a dose. Usually you end up taking around 4 to 6 doses, depending on the person, what they've been using, their history, so on and so forth. So
if you take one dose, how long does that last?
Honestly, if you just took one dose, the very first dose, which we call a tester dose, it's to see if the body reacts negatively. It's like a microdose. Nothing would happen. If you took, let's say, the second dose, which is really the first dose of the actual doses, you would probably feel that after an hour and feel those effects for maybe 2 to 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on the milligrammage.
And before you dive into it, it sounds like it's kind of a trickle effect, right, of how it hits your body, because you're taking it, you let it sit in, you let it hit, and then you're taking another dose, and then an hour later you're feeling those effects.
Well, and it's very important to be done that way because of simply how strong it is. I mean, we're talking about the strongest physical experience you'll ever have, as well as mental, obviously. But so, and also its effect on the heart, it can produce what's called long QT syndrome. So you cannot give someone too much at once, but you also need to give them enough to do what you need to do to the receptor sites to get that reset.
So that's interesting. Is there any other psychedelic that's like that?
In what regard?
In the way of like how you would, the amount and dosage you would give, like periodic, like you're saying at a certain time, you're kind of easing them into it. Like, you know, with psilocybin, you would just take mushrooms, right? A gram,
Right.
a gram, and you'd be done. But you're saying with this, you have to be careful with the amount you're doing because it's so potent and overwhelming. Is that what you're saying?
Not only is it potent and overwhelming, but if you took too much, let's say you took the first 4 doses at one time, you know, and you're talking maybe 800 milligrams, you are going to have a terrible time. Your body is going to react very intensely. You're going to be vomiting. You're going to be spinning. I mean, it's just going to be overwhelming. You can go into what we call an Ibogaine coma, where you're just fucked up for days.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to change your clothes, feed you, and you're just so exhausted and jumbled. It's that strong. So it's very important to dose correctly. That's why I really don't condone people doing it at home alone. Right. You know, when we do it, we have, you know, you're hooked up to an EKG. You have a doctor here, a nurse here for the whole time. You're hooked up to IV fluids. So, you know, we take it very seriously. Not because it's some super dangerous drug, but because there have been known side effects, and we want to be ready for those if they arrive or if they come up. Right. You know, I think the reputation is that it's a lot more dangerous than it is, based on really old studies and old information, compared to the research that's happened up to this point. But you know, nonetheless, it's a very extreme treatment that should be, you know, taken very seriously.
Right. So, okay. So you talked about the importance of dosing, making sure that you're prepared for anything that happened, because of course, you know, everybody's different in how they react to things.
Sure.
So now let's talk about, you know, what are people experiencing in terms of psychedelic experience, you know, as they're starting to feel these doses kick in?
So typically, you know, you're laying in bed with eye shades on and headphones. I would say after about an hour, you're feeling it. Within 2 hours, you're pretty engulfed. And the first 2 to 3 hours, for me, different for everyone, become increasingly visual, to the point where you become so engulfed in these visions that for moments you're not aware. You're totally disassociated from, I'm in a bed, I'm in Mexico, I'm me. You start, it's almost, they call it a waking dream state almost, but the visuals are so realistic. You know, it's diving into your memory glands in your brain. It's sometimes you relive actual events. You see real people. It's not, you know, cartoonish.
Did you ever have those experiences where you relived something, or you saw someone from the past, or, you know, things like that? Sure.
Yeah, I actually, in one of my experiences, there was a part where I was playing hide and go seek with myself as a 1-year-old. So I was like walking through space on this trail in space, looking for me, looking in file cabinets, cupboards, and then I would find myself and I'd hold my own hand and just kind of connect. I mean, very overwhelming experiences. you know, my first Ibogaine experience was so vivid and powerful and extreme. I think that it just shook me so hard to the core. I think that's what really did it for me. That's what made me fall in love with this plant. I mean, as scary as it was just stunningly beautiful. I had a very meaningful experience. I traveled back in time. I met shamans of the past ages. They taught me about my soul and my connection to my ancestors and ancestral information. And it was just so incredible. And, you know, but I was seeking that, which is the most important part. I was seeking a spiritual experience.
And that is important, right? Because when you're experimenting with different psychedelics, you really need to be in a good headspace. You need to be in a good set, right? So is that what you're talking about in terms of preparation?
Well, that's one of the things that is very important for preparation. You know, a lot of people, you can imagine that a lot of the patients that were coming into our clinic, you know, they're lost. You know, they're coming in on the worst day of their life, you know, so they don't realize that they can have a spiritual experience. Maybe they don't feel like they're allowed to have a spiritual experience. Who knows? You know, addiction makes you feel crazy things, shame and guilt, all types of stuff. So I think it's super important to be nurtured properly during that preparation, so that you're doing some expectation management. You are allowing them to create the intention. You're enabling them. You're you know, to create that intention. This is going to be a spiritual experience for me. This is going to be an epiphany moment, one of those wow moments for me. And how do you do that? You do it just through connecting with people, the person, over time, over the prep. I mean, as I've told you before, you know, we might get into that. We do a very intense preparation physically for the plant as well.
Got it. Yeah.
But that's part of it, and that's a huge part of it, and it needs to be a huge part of it. You know, people need guidance before doing something like this, and they need guidance afterwards to make sense of it, to really ingrain it and harness it, you know.
So do those clinics, like say in Mexico, do they provide that let's call it pre-preparation phase? Like before you get to Mexico, like how is it on the person to really do that themselves and you know, learn that that's important, or is that communicated beforehand by the clinic?
So I would say 99% of clinics do not do a prep of any sort. Now they might have a therapist there who will sit down and talk to you a couple times, but you know, most clinics are 7-day to 8-day clinics. You're given Ibogaine on day 3, usually, you know, your full flood dose. And then you're given some boosters, smaller doses, the following days to diminish any post-acute withdrawal you may be experiencing, because Ibogaine totally kills withdrawal, or it should. But the problem with that is, you know, you're basically saying that no matter what your addiction is, no matter what meds you're taking or have been taking, 8 days is suitable for you. And you're giving Ibogaine too much responsibility at that point. You know, it only has so much effectiveness on its, you know, partial opioid agonistic properties. So you're either going to give them too much milligrams per kilogram of body weight and try and really push it out because you haven't prepped them and potentially hurt them in the process. And that creates a slew of other things. You know, you're vomiting the whole time. You're dizzy. You don't have a very visually strong experience. And I've done it both ways. I've done it fully prepped. I've done it not prepped. The difference is astounding. But I think the issue is that a lot of doctors you'll find in the field take the stance that the psychedelic property of Ibogaine is meaningless, that you're only there to get the neural rewiring, reset that Ibogaine does. And that works 100% of the time, that aspect of it. The psychedelic aspect of it, I think, is very heavily influenced on your setting, your intention, how you've been prepared for this, nurtured, how you have sacrificed for this, things like that. But you know, and that's an issue, is that a lot of doctors think psychedelic part is really just the cherry on top. It's not an important part of this. Don't take it too seriously. But I think that it really can be so profound that that can be the side of the coin that really resonates with somebody after treatment, you know.
Is that affect the psychedelic experience? Is that affect the reason why they call it the reset drug, the reset your brain drug?
Well, it's different from other psychedelics in the sense that it has a very specific purpose, well, depending on what you're taking. So hypothetically, let's talk about a heroin addict, someone who comes in for treatment for heroin addiction. They're currently on 2 grams a day of heroin. Well, technically, I can put them into withdrawal, wait 12 hours, and do a full flood dose on them, you know, in the same 48-hour period. But that they're most certainly going to have post-acute withdrawal afterwards. They're still going to be in withdrawal after the treatment. So therefore it didn't work, right? What exactly, I'm trying to follow your question.
So, well, what I was asking is, like, you said there's basically two different benefits, and there's the doctors are saying that
right.
It's beneficial because it resets your brain, and it gets you, you know, it helps you with those addiction, you know, disorders that we talked about. But then the psychedelic effect, don't worry about that. You said they dismiss.
Right.
So what is the first property that they talk about when they say the resetting of the brain? So let's talk about the science behind that. I mean, do they?
Yeah.
So like this Ibogaine drug basically hits a receptor in your brain that targets opioids, does it not?
So you have 3 main opiate receptors in the brain, 3 sites. I think it's kappa, mu, and delta. And what Ibogaine does essentially, so when you're abusing heroin, let's say, or any opiate, it's attaching to those receptor sites, and it slowly eats away at them, disforms them. That's what creates tolerance. You need to fill it with more and more and more in order to satisfy it and make it feel normal. And that's what leads you to do more and more heroin. What Ibogaine does is it comes into those receptor sites, it pushes out the opiates, and it saturates the receptor. As it metabolizes into noribogaine, which is a metabolite it starts producing as soon as it metabolizes, and it has a much longer half-life than ibogaine. That acts as, it basically rebuilds your receptor site. It stays in there, rebuilds the site. Obviously, if you continue using opiates, you're going to push it out and lose the benefits of it. But that's the very specific intention behind an ibogaine treatment with an opioid addict, is that you can take someone in active addiction, do an ibogaine treatment, and no withdrawal. If you do it right, no withdrawal, no obsession when they come out of it. And that's it. There's no Suboxone taper, there's no methadone, there's no other drugs involved, aside from, you know, we use a lot of natural stuff. We do vitamins, nutrients, amino acids, IV therapy, cellular rehabilitation, stuff like that. But as far as like narcotics go, no, you know, no narcotics. We really try to use as minimal medication as possible. Now, to answer your question, as far as what type of prep would a different clinic do, one of these 7-day, 8-day clinics, if you call in and you're taking an antidepressant or you're on specific, you know, psych medication that you would need to come off, that would be your responsibility prior to coming in. Obviously, a responsible clinic is going to test your blood, test your urine, make sure it's not in there anymore, so on and so forth, do their due diligence. You know, but if we have a client, we'll taper them off of that medication ourselves if we need to, if they don't feel they can do that on their own, because we have the ability to keep them a little more comfortable during that time using other plant medicines, using other holistic treatments. It's a perfect blend of Eastern and Western. You know, we don't ignore the benefits of Western medicine. There's a place for everything.
Right, right, and in your experience, and the data may not be there, but compared to traditional methods of recovery like methadone clinics, Suboxone, like you were talking about, how do these Ibogaine clinics compare? I know that obviously they're still illegal in some countries, but in the countries that they are, do you know any numbers about the success rates afterward compared to these other traditional treatments?
So that's the big question that a lot of people ask. They have done some past studies where they have, numbers that suit that question. Whether they're accurate today, I don't know. Um, all of the Ibogaine clinics in the world, there's probably over 100, have never come together and shared data. You also have to imagine all the patients that leave and may never communicate with you again. So it's very hard to get that data. But according to the studies that have been done, patients who do an Ibogaine treatment have a 20 to 30% success rate, which is freaking enormous.
Hmm.
Traditional treatment, which I still work in, I've been working in the treatment field for a very long time. I think I'd have to look it up to give you the exact numbers, but I believe the success rate's like 4%. So, it's a massive difference. Now, I think there's a lot of factors that, and variables that go into those numbers, preparation prior to treatment, mental preparation, and post-treatment care. Are you going straight home back to the environment you came from, or are you doing follow-up care? Are you doing therapy? Are you doing counseling? Are you doing some type of group function? Are you connecting? Are you changing your life? Those things, so.
Because you can't just, I mean, you got to manage expectations at the same time. You're not saying that this is something that's gonna, it's up to the person at the end of the day that needs to make the change and be in the mindset, right? This is something that can help you with your neurology and the way you think and function, but it's ultimately your actions that play the biggest part.
Listen, it doesn't fix free will. It doesn't fix stupidity. You have to imagine addiction is so deeply ingrained in some people. And I believe personally there are levels to addiction. I think some people are worse than others and vice versa. But, it's, I like to say, if it will bring you back through the maze to the starting line and allow you to make a decision, which way am I going? You can walk right back into the maze, or you can walk the other way and try something new. But it's going to give you such a head start as opposed to traditional detox or traditional treatment where you're fucked up from the meds and the detoxing and everything for months,
Hmm.
6 months, and you're not fully out of the funk until nearly a year. You walk out of Ibogaine treatment very clear and very lucid, very confident, very sure of what you want and what you need. Are you going to do it is the question. And that's why I think post-treatment is so important and follow-up treatment is so important, because you need guidance. We can't do it alone. Ibogaine is not a cure. And people who sell it as a cure, listen, that's their choice. But I can't call it that because it's not. I'm not saying once an addict, always an addict. I think addiction is something that can be transcended spiritually. But as far as calling Ibogaine a cure, it's not a cure. It is a method of detox using sacred healing practices that have a profound result compared to modern medicine. And it's an alternative treatment for people who might be treatment resistant, I think. It works really well for people who have gone to rehab 10 times and like me and never had results, because deep down, all they want is success. That's what they want. It might not look like that, but that's what they want. They just want to get well, and they don't think it's possible at that point.
Hmm. No, I appreciate you clarifying that and putting it that way, because just like in any industry, even when you talk about cannabis or CBD products, they're saying they cure this and they cure that, and it's a, like you're saying, it's a treatment, it's a detox, and it's been done for hundreds of thousands of years, and there is high success rates. And it seems like it's just like, you know, how cannabis is in terms of listed as a Schedule 1 narcotic, and therefore the capacity for learning and having peer review studies and actually understanding the value of the plant is far in between, right? And it takes places like Mexico and other countries that have it legal to allow that learning to happen. And so, from my understanding, you worked in the clinic in Mexico, right?
Yeah, I was the program director down there.
Yes.
So basically I did the treatment, and then I went home, and then not long after that I moved down there and kind of just created a new life down there.
So tell us what it was like to work, and you were working for your childhood friend also, right? Because he was the founder, the owner of the clinic. So
I like to say childhood friend because, you know, we always were indirectly in the same circle and involved with the same people, but we were never really tight or friends. I couldn't tell you if I had met him before that or not. That's how little of a connection we had in real life.
you knew each other through other people, like, yeah, you were
Right.
mutual friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Lived in the same neighborhood. He was a little older.
Got
So.
Okay. So yeah, tell us about the experience, man. What was it like working there?
It was, you know, it was such an important part of my life. I think working there gave me just as much as Ibogaine gave me, as far as fulfillment and purpose, connection. You know, I've always worked in the addiction field for 9 years now. So I'm very used to traditional treatment methods, but I've always had this overwhelming desire and love and appreciation and want to be connected to alternative healing and ancient healing. I have felt connected to the Amazon since I was 12 years old. I've been researching ayahuasca. That's odd for a 12-year-old, you know? So I've always had this weird connection. And so to be there, to work with, you know, we had some beautiful shamans come through who taught me some really incredible lessons, beautiful people. I learned to work with a medicine called Changa, which is a DMT smoking blend. So I learned to offer ceremony with that. So to get to work with our patients on a one-on-one basis, take them through these ceremonies and watch them transform and change their minds about things was, in such a short time, was incredible. You know, there was just some very spiritual moments down there. Even watching ayahuasca ceremonies that were happening in the living room, you know, just being near it, being in it was beautiful. It was a very beautiful experience.
Yeah. Well, it's just so fascinating because as human beings, we're so geared toward digging our heels in the ground, or having one viewpoint and not, you know, not budging on certain things, or just being so dimensional in some ways. But those experiences really do open your mind. Takes the ego out and really just kind of makes you feel like you're just part of one ecosystem, right? And everything's kind of flowing.
Absolutely. But, you know, you'd be surprised. You bring up two really good points. One is that, you know, you would think that the plant medicine world would be like that, but it's not. It's not. It's kind of amazing, but you'll find a lot of big egos in the ibogaine industry, in the ayahuasca industry, in the holistic industry. You'll find
Is that the business side of it, though? I mean, is that the business side of it, or like is that human nature acting that way because of business, or within the practice?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's something that I like to call spiritual egotism, right? And that's, oh, I've drinking ayahuasca more times than you. You know, that's the microcosm of it. And so it creates ego within that community itself. Or I'm more enlightened than you, that type of attitude. You know, or it creates a person who suddenly disconnects from everyone. And, you know, getting into it's a very difficult process, you know, because you're going through so many emotions and whatnot. I don't falter anybody for falling into those categories time and time, you know, here and there. I think, like you said, it's a little bit of human nature too. I think that the ego serves a purpose. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's your relationship to it that defines it, and defines whether you're an egomaniac or maybe you have a big ego but you're a humble person. I think there's balance in there, you know.
Hmm. What you said as early is fascinating when you said at the age of 12 you were researching ayahuasca.
Yeah.
What? Okay, first off, what was your earliest experience? Was it 12 years old, or were you just interested and curious? And like, and then let's talk about your first experience with whatever it was, whatever psychedelic, and how was that?
So I became interested in psychedelics truthfully because of my father. My dad is a very open-minded man. You know, he uses cannabis as medicine has for a long time for a disease he has. So he's very open-minded to that type of thing. He was always very supportive of me and my plant medicine path, especially when he saw it was working. And so he showed me a movie called Altered States. In short, it's about a guy who's interested in psychedelics and goes to Mexico and takes mushrooms of the tribe and combines it with isolation deprivation tank therapy. And so it's a great movie. I recommend it. But that was my first time seeing psychedelics. Now, I had smoked pot already, so I knew about that. So I suddenly just, you know, had this desire to do it. As a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I was not your average kid. I was very isolated. I smoked weed alone all day, all the time. Had a lot of problems when I was around that age. But I think what attracted me most, even then, before I really had much idea about this, was there's these people who live in the Amazon with nothing to our standards. And yet they're happy and they're healthy and they're content with nothing. And there was something inside of me that envied that, you know, because I come from South Florida, it's near Boca Raton, it's flashy, and I didn't feel like I fit there.
Right.
It was a very young age. And so these tribes and the way they live just fascinated me. So I started researching them, and of course came across ayahuasca. And you know, that's sort of what kicked it off. My first psychedelic experience was with LSD. And I took way too much because we thought it was fake. Ended up butt naked, laying in a fire ant hill. I had over hundreds of fire ant bites all over me. I had no idea till hours later. I was so gone. But even that, even though it sounds like such a negative experience, it blew my mind. And I was just fascinated by what had just happened.
Yeah. You had done so much research prior too, so to have that actual experience firsthand probably was overwhelming. Or
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Well, definitely overwhelming because I didn't realize what I was, you know, how much I was taking. I was naive, but necessary. I think looking back, I mean, you know, it didn't scare me, but it really got my attention, if anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with like Colorado decriminalizing psilocybin, I mean, what's the future of psychedelics in a legitimate industry, right? Like what needs to happen, or what do you think will happen and play out over the coming years?
Well, I think it'll look very similar to the ketamine movement. How private ketamine practices have started popping up. The further along it gets, the more success they have. They're starting to, you know, get into Medicare and Medicaid. So that's working well. And ketamine kind of started like the marijuana industry started. Mom and pop shops, mom and pop clinics. You know, you got to have a lot, you know, capital to get the state to invest in your licensing and so on and so forth. Same type of idea. But I think it'll look similar to that. I think we're going to see state legalization before we see federal legalization. And within that, I think we'll see private clinics offering psilocybin therapy, probably psilocybin first, As far as Iboga goes and Ibogaine, I do not see it becoming legal anytime soon for treatment, just because it's so far behind psilocybin research. They were knee deep in psilocybin and LSD research when we even found out that Ibogaine had anti-addictive properties in 1962. So those plants had a much bigger head start. Iboga is far behind, and it's so radical. It's such a radical treatment. Plus, you have to remember, big pharma kind of owns this country, and to create something that could potentially take away the need for things like Suboxone, well, that's a little threatening in itself.
Yeah, I understand that for sure.
Yeah.
And
plus, I don't know if you've heard of MC18, but it's a man-made, synthetic derivative of noribogaine, essentially, the metabolite that is really what we're after during an Ibogaine treatment. And there's no psychedelic effects. They're going to start human trials, and basically it's an organic Suboxone. You can take this medication and not get addicted to it, not have to withdraw from it. I think that'll be legal much long before Ibogaine ever is. But I have a deep love for the plant, so I really think that the plant is the benefiting part of this, and the whole experience of it and the spirituality behind it. As far as addiction goes, I think it's crucial for creating a new way of life, as opposed to just taking a pill at home and hoping for the best.
Right.
That's very American mindset. But it has its place, and I'm sure it'll help people. Just like I know Suboxone helps people, and I've kind of come to not be anti anything at this point. Just more, like I said before, interested in, you have a good relationship with it or not. Dr. Drew is the one who I got that from, and the way he explains it is very good. There's no such thing as a good or bad drug. It's your relationship that defines the drug. So, and I can subscribe to that. So.
Yeah, and that viewpoint has got to be something that you've learned in those spiritual experiences. Just to be more open-minded and not judgmental, because everybody's different and everyone reacts to things differently, right?
That's right.
So, well, Stephen, I've really enjoyed talking with you, man. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we end here?
I guess just, if you're interested in Ibogaine, I always love talking about it if anyone has questions, even just the BS or whatever, or if you need direction or help in any type of way, that's my desire. That's what I seek to do, because that's what was done for me and that's what worked for me. So it's kind of like anything else. So I encourage people, if people are struggling with addiction or alcoholism or whatever it may be, get help, try to get help. I'm willing to, whether it be through Ibogaine or treatment, it doesn't matter. Just, get help, reach out, connect. I really think connection's so big and we're lacking it. And I think these spiritual experiences that can be provided by some of these plants can be truly life-changing in the long term and the short term. And I think that we really need to redefine how we look at success and how we judge success in an addict specifically. But that's a whole nother conversation. I guess the overall message is, if you need help, reach out. Don't let the shame and guilt turn you into another statistic, because that's what happens. Reach out, get help, connect. I'm here. You can always reach out to Kevin. He'll give you my information. I just, the only thing that's going to work is if we talk to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Period. So that's where I'm at with it.
Well said, man. I couldn't agree more with you. And you're a great guy, and I appreciate the education today. And I really appreciate. Shout out to David Noche, my college buddy, for getting us connected.
Right.
So, yeah,
Noche.
Noche. Well, Stephen, thanks again for your time, and I look forward to having you on again as we talk more about psychedelics to come.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you having me on. It was great. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thanks everybody for listening. Bye.